Hello, welcome to Expanded Knowledge. This is Anthony. Today in this video, I'm going to be discussing my thoughts and analysis on the recent JFK assassination hearing that took place last week. That's what this video is going to be about. Before I get into that, I want to take a couple minutes to just check in with those viewers who've been here for a while and just let you know where I'm at a little bit. I haven't been publishing here on the YouTube channel much for the last few months, and really I've just been busy working at the college and several schools, end of the semester, and grading and teaching 5 classes. It's a lot of time that it takes up. As well, I've been working on writing a book, which I've mentioned from time to time, which I kind of made my primary focus for a while, and I'm about 800 pages into the manuscript for that book. I'll be talking more about that and sharing it as the months roll on here. I'm hoping I can finish the book within the next year. And it's required a lot of research, a lot of going to the archives, a lot of distilling different information and synthesizing it all together. And it is based around the UFO subject and where my research naturally led me to, and kind of what I'm trying to present and make different points and conclusions that haven't really so much been explored or discussed in the field. So that's why I haven't been on here. And then I would say, to be honest, the third reason is I definitely went through some phases of getting a little bit frustrated with the process of what's going on in terms of the government efforts to disclose more information about the UFO subject, as well as just cynicism about what's going on in the world at large. And I can't help following and keeping up with everything and feeling how I feel about it. So I did also just take a step away. And I do really enjoy coming on here. I do really enjoy sharing my insights here, just for what they're worth, and my research, and hopefully contributing to others connecting the dots for themselves and going to do their own research as well. So I'm happy to be back here, and I do have motivation to be publishing on here regularly, and also really expanding beyond just the UFO topic. It turns out that in my view is probably, as far as I could see, the most important subject in society right now, if I'm to be frank. And I could expound on my reasons why, but I'm not going to do that here. Point is that I do want to be covering more topics, and a lot of stuff about history and different interpretations of how things have been presented in history. And I think all this stuff is really connected together, as well as so much more. We get into the consciousness aspect of everything and a variety of other subjects. So here today, of course, I'm going to be discussing the JFK assassination hearing. Now, I understand, or at least when I think about how I'm going to speak about this in this video here, there may be viewers out there who have never heard anything about the JFK assassination. There may be young viewers out there who don't really even know who JFK was. And then there may be some of you listening that have gone down the rabbit hole of the JFK assassination topic. So I'm going to try to kind of speak towards all of these different groups that may be listening. So to be brief, we're talking about John F. Kennedy, and he was a president that in 1963 was assassinated. He was going down the street during a procession of a ceremony in Dallas, Texas, and he was shot at this big public event and killed. The government made a investigation commission, as they do with most of these events. This was called the Warren Commission, and they investigated who killed him, what happened, and the conclusion was that it was a lone assassin acting alone, whose name was Lee Harvey Oswald, and he shot him from up in a building, from high up in the window, shot down onto the car and killed him. That was the conclusion. That was the case closed. Nothing to see here. However, right from the beginning, there was a lot of questions, a lot of anomalies, a lot of contradictions that were brought up. And so now for 60 plus years, this has been one of the biggest conspiracies and conspiracy theories out there, is who really killed JFK, and was it just Lee Harvey Oswald by himself? Now, there are so many books that you could go down to learn about this topic, and I usually stay away from the JFK conspiracy because it's so complicated and there's so much to it. But the reason that I felt called to do this video is because I think that this hearing that just happened 4 or 5 days ago, if you look at it a certain way from the facts of what happened and what was expressed, that it is fairly a simple situation, that if Congress handles it the right way, we could move forward to understanding what really happened. And now, why is it important to know who really killed JFK? Well, because there's a lot of circumstantial evidence that it was elements, members, some group within the CIA who was behind ultimately killing the president. And if we can prove for the record that the CIA or elements within it, within our government, killed one of our own presidents here in the US, this would be very important. And it would also be a milestone for other cover-ups, conspiracies that the media, the mass media for many decades now has done their part to write off as, tinfoil hat, conspiracy theory, fringe, when really the facts kind of are just, if you have a chance to look at them objectively, they kind of stare you right in the face. So the main thing to know about the Kennedy assassination is that the bullets that were, the bullet wound that was said to kill him, they call it the magic bullet, because of the way that it went in and out. According to the official investigation records, it's very unlikely, but they said it was possible. So then you have the fact that there's lots of claims of people that were involved with the Warren Commission or close to members of it or were investigated by them. And if you look at who was on the Warren Commission, one of JFK's biggest enemies, who he fired as CIA director, Allen Dulles, was on the Warren Commission. This idea, which is really nothing new to us, this idea that these commissions are corrupt in themselves, the right people are placed there, and then the right conclusions are made about what happened. And you could look at another example would be the 9/11 Commission, which there's just blatantly false information and omission of information. One of the things that we always talk about in critical thinking is omission of information is one of the most powerful ways to obscure meaning or to mislead. And then I believe it was George Orwell who wrote that omission's the greatest form of lying. So just leaving out information. And that's what happened with the Warren Commission as well. And so you have all of this going on. And again, I could be here talking for the next hour about all of the details about the JFK assassination and all the different theories and conspiracies. And again, there's been probably hundreds of well-written books about it. Yet we still find ourselves today, 60 years later, and 30 years after a government investigation was began in 1994 to get more information about this. We're still having this conversation today. And I certainly have my, disagreements with certain members of this federal declassification of federal secrets task force in the House Oversight Committee of the U.S. Congress, which is, among other things, looking into the JFK assassination, the UFO subject. They said they're going to be looking into Epstein and 9/11, other things like that. While I think that's great that they've created this, and certainly I have my disagreements of points, for example, with the chairwoman, Representative Anna Paulina Luna. She did say earlier this year that she thinks that President Trump's face should be put on Mount Rushmore, which, hey, we're all free to have our opinions. I tend to find that to be a little bit unjustified at this point. And I'm not trying to, necessarily take any side politically. Again, for the record here, I am a true independent when it comes to politics and all that. I respect whatever your views are. Again, how I look at everything is always through the tools of critical thinking and analysis. And I look at the facts, the evidence, the sources, evaluate it all, and come to a decision, come to a viewpoint. And that doesn't align with saying, I'm on the right, I'm on the left. I guess if I have to say it, I'm in the middle. But it's an issue by issue basis. So anyway, that's a side note. My point being, despite where I might disagree with certain members of this task force, the fact that they've put together this hearing is great. And now they got some criticism in the first hearing that happened or a couple months ago, earlier this year, where they had the Hollywood director, Oliver Stone, was kind of like the main witness. And I read a lot of people kind of criticizing that, saying, oh, what is this? This is all just some nonsense, and kind of dismissing the whole idea that there's a big cover-up and conspiracy around the JFK assassination, which is, I think it's very clear. And I think any reasonable person that looks at the objective facts would also say that. And this hearing, though, was different. And I have had my doubts about if it would do anything. And then I noticed that they just had this 5 days ago. So I checked it out, and I watched the hearing, and I read the statements from the members and their documents that they gave. And I actually think it's quite significant. So where I thought I would never touch the JFK assassination topic, here I do want to point this out. And basically my goal here will be to share with you the biggest takeaways and kind of what to look more into yourself or look out for. This hearing brought forward a number of witnesses. One was, so let me give you some context first. And actually, where people were really throwing shade on the idea that they would have this Hollywood director, Oliver Stone, come up at the congressional hearing being kind of limited. Well, note that one of these members that testified last week said the reason, this was the judge and the chair of this committee, the reason that they had a government-mandated investigation into the JFK files in the early 90s was because of Oliver Stone's film. So it kind of goes to show you the power of, even, it might be mocked and laughed at, but even a Hollywood director choosing to make something that focuses on this and the power of that. This led to what I'll share with you now. In 1994, Congress did a mandated review board for the declassification of the JFK assassination files, because from 63 up until the early 90s, tons of files were never released about what the government's investigation into the assassination. And so then they created this review board, which actually the UAP disclosure bill from a couple years ago was designed around this, which is this idea you have a board of members, qualified members, experts, and authority figures in different fields that will look at all the documentation, decide what should still be kept classified for national security and what can we release to have more transparency. So that's what they did with the JFK files. And all right, so then that ran from 94 to 98, I believe, are the years. And now we've had these other 10,000 plus files that were released. So clearly they didn't get everything. And clearly if you watch this recent hearing, they still don't have everything. And even though you have, for example, on News Nation, this is what I think is crazy about this topic. You have Geraldo Rivera, like that's his name, going on News Nation and saying, authoritatively, hey, look, I'm an investigative journalist for 30, 40 years. I looked into the JFK more than anyone. I've seen more records than anybody. And I can tell you there's no conspiracy. It was just Lee Harvey Oswald who shot him from the window. And it's just crazy to me that you could have him say that, and then you could see what was revealed at this hearing, which most of it's not new information, by the way. It's just that it's kind of buried. So the idea of having this hearing, it brings these people out. They say things under oath, which obviously has the penalty of jail time if you're found doing perjury, lying under oath. And it just brings it, if the media does the right job, which they don't, it brings out these facts. So without further ado, let me give you a quick overview of this hearing. This review board, which was called the Assassination Records Review Board from 94 to 98, the chair of that was a federal judge. Forget his name, but you can see it in there. He was one of the witnesses. The other witness, by the name of Douglas Horn, was the chief analyst of military records for the review board. So he went into, investigated, interviewed firsthand witnesses, and pried into all of the military records about the assassination, which included all of the medical autopsy examinations. So if we cut out all of the noise of everything, all this shooter there, this whole thing, let's talk about the medical records when the president's body, Kennedy's body, was sent, investigated, and documents were made, photographs, x-rays were made, and then a conclusion was made about how he died. So you had this gentleman, and he wasn't just an independent researcher, not to say anything bad about independent researchers out there in the public domain, but this guy was a military veteran and went on to work at the State Department. And in this case, he was hired as the chief military records analyst for the congressionally mandated JFK Assassination Records Review Board. So, this was his information that he testified and submitted to the congressional record. And that's what I think was the most important thing from this hearing. You also had a gentleman they had another review board type of committee, the Assassinations Committee. I don't remember the exact title, in the late 70s, that was looking into the assassinations that the CIA may have been involved in. And so you had a gentleman there named, I believe, Hardway, and he was testifying that the CIA obstructed his investigation in the late 70s when he was looking into the JFK case, and he revealed other information that they basically obfuscated, intervened, tried to prevent him from getting information. And then you had a doctor who was an older man now. I think he was in his late 80s or 90 now. But when he was 26, he was in the hospital room as one of the surgeons during the JFK autopsy and medical examination of the body. And he testified under oath to Congress. So you had those four gentlemen. And then you had one person who I don't even know what her credentials were, but she was the one person of the five, and she's listed as the minority witness. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but she was the one, and she made a couple statements and basically was skeptical and saying, hey, there's no conspiracy here. And so those were your witnesses. So you had their opening statements, and then you had each of the people, the Congress members on the panel, question each witness in the stupid, in my opinion, the really badly formatted method in these hearings of each person gets 5 minutes. It should not be like that. In my opinion, it's got to be changed. It's got to be changed. All right, you want to make it a 2-hour hearing or whatever it is. How can we best use that 2 hours? And giving Congress members 5 minutes to question, it's just extremely limiting. And you see it time and time and again at these hearings. They're on a good trail of questioning, and then boom, they're out of time. So it should be shared more of, hey, who's coming with the good questions? Where are we getting some juicy information? And let's be flexible. The person running the hearing, the chairperson, should be allowed to let the time go over, do whatever they want. That's how I would do it. Anyway, so they each had their 5 minutes of questions. Now, what I noticed is that a lot of people focused on the doctor, which understandably, and that's probably what people will take away maybe the most is this doctor. And he said he saw bullet wounds in the front of JFK's throat, which of course would not align with the theory that Oswald shot him in the top of the head or the back or I forget exactly what, but it's, Oswald shot him from this angle here. That's the official explanation. So the fact that he would have bullet wounds from the front in his throat just doesn't make sense. And so he testified, said he saw 4 bullet wounds, and that 2 of them or 3 of them were from the front. Okay, which that alone just disproves the lone Harvey Oswald assassin theory. And you saw multiple Congress members focus in on the doctor, and as great as that testimony is, it's not the most important one. And the skeptics all day can say, hey, this guy was just an oral surgeon, which is what he was, remembering and saying he remembered this from 60 years ago. So he's not going to have any conclusive evidence other than his testimony. So not that it's not valuable, it's great they had him, but they focused on him too much, in my opinion. The next guy that they focused on the most was this guy, Hardway, who was on the late 70s Assassinations Committee in Congress. And his whole thing was, basically, to keep it brief here for you, his whole thing was that he was uncovering that the CIA was using Lee Harvey Oswald in previous covert operations. So he was a CIA asset, an agent working for them. And the place he kept mentioning was Mexico City. So basically, yeah, evidence that Oswald was being used as a CIA operative in the months prior to the Kennedy assassination. And again, that's important testimony. That's important evidence. This guy said the CIA was literally manipulating his investigation, and he swore all this under oath. I think he's got documentation as well to prove it. So that's obviously significant. But again, I think it distracts. And as I say, I think it kind of dulls the edge of the kind of knife here in this whole hearing, because, all right. And then you had the judge and former chair of the review board chime in and say, yeah, I think maybe the CIA was trying to cover up that they were involved with Oswald previously, because they wouldn't want that to come out. It would look bad for them, right? And it kind of dulls the idea that the CIA was involved directly in the assassination, or whatever key members of the CIA were. And they kept focusing back on this guy Hardway. And I just think, from my view, it distracts. It's Mexico City, Oswald doing this, right? All right, we're talking about the president being murdered, shot in broad daylight, and that being covered up. And what's the real story? Who killed him and why? So again, important piece, but everyone's focusing on it too much. The judge was not questioned that much, but his statements were powerful. And he basically said the same thing. As the chair of the review board, he said every federal agency that they worked with, either they were all different in the degree to which they did this, but they all did it, were very difficult, did not comply, did not cooperate, even though it was mandated by law. They didn't give them all the files, and they obfuscated information and kind of just obfuscated the whole investigation. This come from the chair of the committee and the federal judge. So that's important testimony right there. And he's basically saying verbatim, or he's basically saying straight up, there was a cover-up of what actually happened. All right. And now we get on to the gentleman who nobody questioned until the very end, when the chairwoman, Luna, questioned him. And that is Douglas Horne, who I found to be the most impressive witness there. And so Horne was the chief analyst of the military records for the Assassination Review Board from 94 to 98. And he was involved in the depositions of a group of 10 people that were at the scene of the medical examination of the president's body after the assassination. And he also did a variety of other FOIA requests, documents, investigation, analysis of historical documents into how all of the medical examination data was. So if anyone listening kind of from a critical angle listens to all these opening statements, and clearly if we're trying to just cut through all the noise and get to the bottom of it, Douglas Horne's testimony and the documentation that he provided and the leads that he provided to Congress, in my view, I would argue, is clearly the most direct way to make progress on this. Let me try to explain why here. And again, I advise you to actually go on to the Congress House Oversight Committee's webpage about this hearing, which you can Google, and you can see Douglas Horne's written statement and supporting statements that he submitted to Congress, and it kind of explains all of this. But let me just summarize, and I'm going to leave some things out, but the big ones. So essentially, there were, according to the investigation he did while on the review board, there were multiple x-rays, photographs that were missing, that multiple people on the autopsy or medical examination team testified under oath were there and then were gone from the official record that was kept about it. There were bullets as well removed and that disappeared. The x-rays, they were even switched. Certain brain images were actually switched, that they were not the president's brain. They were something else. Photographs were missing. And all of this, as he says in the hearing, would prove, if you could just get one of these missing photographs that that was testified under oath existed but were taken out or changed, you would be able to prove once and for all that Lee Harvey Oswald didn't kill the president from the roof with the lone bullet. So it's that simple, right? And here's the guy, and this isn't coming from someone who just wrote a book or is theorizing or something. This is coming from the chief military records analyst on the congressionally mandated Assassination Records Review Board from the 90s, whose job literally was to go and pry into and get the answers to this. And he's out there telling you this under oath and telling you a matter of factly that there was documented x-rays, photographs that would prove definitively the president was not killed by Lee Harvey Oswald with the lone shot from the window of the building. So boom, I'm focusing right there if I'm on this task force committee. You know, it's great, all the other stuff, the doctor's testimony, Oswald's involvement with the CIA. We need all of it together, but this is clearly the cutting edge here. And yet, I guess I'm not surprised nobody focused on this guy. And to her credit, at the end, Luna did and gave the guy a chance to elucidate what he's trying to bring forward, which again is nothing new. He's written books about it. He wrote actually a multiple volume series of books about his time on the review board and his findings, as well as who he thinks killed Kennedy ultimately, which I'm actually going to read now because I find his work very interesting, his credentials and his background very impressive. So the other part that's really interesting, and I'm leaving out a lot here because there's a lot that he says, it's kind of hard to, break it all down. But a key part of what he said also was about the Zapruder film. Now, the Zapruder film is sort of infamous in the whole JFK conspiracy because this was a person who was in the crowd that day and who had a video showing the assassination, and it showed that the bullet, the way that the president reacted, it could not have come from where they said it was, the angle of Harvey Oswald doing it from the building. And this footage has been long disputed and inconclusive, but what Douglas Horne shared was that when he investigated sort of the provenance of this film and what happened to it, he was able to find that when this film was first given from the civilian Zapruder, it was bought by one of the media companies, and then it went to the CIA and the CIA's photo analysis center. And essentially it went there on a weekend, on a Friday or Saturday. And then when it came out on Sunday and was sort of went back into the Warren Commission's, or whoever was handling it at this point's investigation, it was changed. And so he was able to follow the paper trail and show that the film was taken to a CIA photo lab and it was spent like a day there and then came back to the investigation committee. And so he had the CIA employee who was the one who took the original raw film and analyzed it, and before it was sent to the photo imaging lab. And then he saw what it was after, and he has the sworn testimony of this gentleman, this CIA officer, or whatever his title was, who was handling the film, who said to him, and he has that submitted to Congress, it was not the same original Zapruder film. And he furthermore says there does exist an original untampered Zapruder film, and Congress should get their hands on that to look at that, because that could also prove once and for all it wasn't the Lee Harvey Oswald story, as well as the fact that it seems almost conclusive, perhaps without totally definitive evidence. I mean, the testimony from the person at the CIA who handled it saying it wasn't the same when they took it back is pretty good, but technically the skeptic can still argue against that. But it seems pretty much clear that the CIA took that film and altered it so that the Zapruder film, as we all know it today, is actually an altered film, according to the chief military records analyst of the review board, Douglas Horn. So it's just that all this information coming from him gives Congress the direct route to go and take the necessary steps to verify this information. And the point is that, from my eyes, to simplify it all, it could be this close to proving it once and for all that the Warren Commission's story that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone assassin is false, impossible, and that in fact it is definitively a fact that he was shot from the front. And this would clarify that. Boom, we could establish that on the historical record once and for all, and then start to move forward into, okay, if it wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald from the building, who shot him and why? And then why was that covered up? And this is what leads, I think, from the clarification of information from this hearing, this is what leads a reasonable conclusion to be able to say it seems highly likely that the CIA was involved in this assassination because, and people have tried to argue, oh, the CIA wanted to cover it up because it was a failure. The CIA wanted to cover it up because of their past involvement with Oswald, and they didn't want to be, implicated in that. But here's the problem with that. All this medical record examinations showing other bullet wounds and fatal shots that would prove it wasn't Oswald. Why was the CIA wanting to cover that up? Why were they trying to cover up the fact that there were other shooters? Why would they care? If they had nothing to do with it, why not? Why try to obfuscate and cover it up? Lack of competency? Okay, well, if it was multiple shooters from the crowd and not just this lone gunman who, by the way, from what I've seen, haven't fully researched it, he was a really bad shot. He was a known, a known person that was on a watch list. So that to show that it was just Lee Harvey Oswald would make the CIA look worse. So if they didn't do anything else, why not let that information come out? Oh, wow, he was shot from the front too. Must have been other people. That makes it less of a burden on you as an agency to say, wow, you really screwed up. If it was just one guy who was a known, watched person, that looks worse than, oh, it was multiple people. So then you have to ask, why did they not want it to be known that there was other shooters, right? And if anything, like I said, proving that it was not just Oswald would help them. So you start to, with the scalpel of reasoning, you start to see now, wow, okay. And again, we have to be careful with our language as well, because when we say the CIA, the government, right? It's not that simple. Within the whole CIA, there wasn't like Operation Assassinate the President on an official CIA document. I highly, highly doubt that was, a thing, or the government. Well, the CIA is part of the government. And okay, you can just have a few actors within an organization to pull a job like that. So we're talking about, yes, the CIA, but we're talking about whoever was in the position at the CIA to pull the strings and afterwards on the Warren Commission to make sure it was covered up. I think at a bare minimum, we have to come away from this task force investigation and these hearings. We have to come away, and this has become clear with me for this last hearing. We have to come away with the conclusive evidence. Kennedy was shot from the front. That simple. Get that. Get those missing photos. Get those missing x-rays. Get whatever other information you need to make it a historical fact. You still have people trying to say that nothing funny went on. He was shot from the front, not from the building by Oswald. And we can clarify that. Now you can look at the reasoning of it. Why? At every turn, at the time of it, the Warren Commission and the CIA, and then later in the late 70s with the assassination investigations in Congress, and then in the 90s with the Review Board investigations. Why is the CIA and even other agencies like the State Department was mentioned, why are they trying to cover up the fact that there were other bullet wounds and other shooters? If they are completely innocent, there's just no reason to. If anything, and again, I'm repeating myself here, if anything, showing that there was multiple shooters makes them look better, makes it look like less of a mistake and a screw up than it being one person who was known as a terrible shot, was using a really apparently old, outdated rifle, and was a known person being watched by the FBI and the CIA. So it doesn't add up. And I'm optimistic about this, although I know that CIA and whoever else is intertwined into the kind of national security state certainly is quite good at what they do, and they could certainly put a lid on this thing. And probably the easiest way to do this would be if this federal task force doesn't get extended beyond whatever it was. I think it has like a 6-month lifespan, whatever you call it. But we'll see. And I would really like to talk and research more about the work, as I've said here, of Douglas P. Horn. I think that, and it's just funny, it goes to show you that you don't even know about some of this information until it's brought to light. And I've always, like I said at the beginning of this, just the JFK, I don't really want to touch it. I think it's clear that there was something else that happened, but it's so much smoke and mirrors and so much obfuscation and confusion, and that it's like my time is better spent elsewhere. But in finding it relevant to today that we're having these hearings a week ago about this, I did take the time to watch it, and that's what I came away with, is I think we're this close to getting those medical examiner documents that would prove once and for all the Warren Commission's conclusion is impossible, and there were other shooters, and that the CIA manipulated the evidence to cover up that there was other shooters, which leads you to have high suspicions as to why. And then hopefully further investigation can go down the rabbit hole. I think it's going to be pretty tough to walk away from this being able to conclusively kind of condemn the CIA from 1963 and onward in the 70s and 90s of having been the ones who ordered and carried out the assassination of the president. That would be great if we could, but little by little. And so I encourage you to go watch the full hearing and to read the documents of the people that testified, and to keep your eyes out for what's to come next. So hopefully you got something out of this, and I will be back again soon, continuing to report and share on various happenings in the world, and of course in the government cover-ups mostly. So thank you again for watching. Hope you have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.